Hello, everyone. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Melody Nest. Looking for a logo or design for your podcast, radio, band, or creative project? I know I was when I started the podcast, and working with a designer who knew what I was looking for made it easy and convenient. Melody Nest is an upcoming platform connecting producers of all kinds to freelance designers to help them create their branding. Check them out and use offer code TESHER to save 10% off your first order. Again, that is offer code TESHER. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the All Things Interesting podcast. Today's guest is up-and-coming writer and director Robert Smat. His debut film, The Last Whistle, which released this summer, consistently scored high marks by critics despite being filmed on a limited budget of $125,000. He attended the USC School of Cinema, graduating with a major in cinema studies and a minor in screenwriting. In this episode, we talk all things The Last Whistle, his experiences as a director and a writer, and about bringing awareness to heart ailments in youth sports. Enjoy the show. Robert, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing good, Tesher. Happy to be here.
So let's talk about your first feature film, The Last Whistle. What could you tell me about it?
Well, it was quite the ride to make it. It was, a very fast process. We did it all in about a year and a half from writing it to filming it to getting it out there. And it's just a lot of fun. It's been such a cool journey with The Last Whistle and with all the actors involved and getting to direct my first movie, basically.
And now you're 24 years old, and your first film is kind of based on the similar premise of the show and movie Friday Night Lights. And what makes this movie interesting is that you managed to film it on a $100,000 budget. But before we go into that, what gave you the idea to develop a movie that was kind of similar to Friday Night Lights?
Well, I just seen so many of my friends and so many people I knew, and even just in terms of, watching on the top charts on iTunes and things like that. There's just such an audience out there that just really loved both the movie and the show Friday Night Lights. And I saw that, and it's just one of those shows that has such a lasting, resounding echo to it, and it doesn't, it's not just that people in Texas, it's people everywhere that love this story. They were thinking about remaking it even to that point, and then they kind of pumped the brakes on it. They kind of said, well, we were thinking of remaking it, but I don't think we're gonna do that anymore. And so I think when they announced that, I was like, oh wow, so there's a big enough audience that they think they can just completely start from scratch here. So let me see if I can access that audience on a much smaller budget and maybe sort of just give them something to hold them over, while the studio system is working on this new adaptation.
And I myself have watched both the film and the show, and it's quite funny because after watching the series itself, I thought to myself, I should have totally been born in Texas, and I'm not sure. And I'm not sure if it's the cinematography or the soundtrack by Explosions in the Sky or just the story. But for some reason, that show was able to make you feel like you were living in Texas at that time and part of a football team.
Oh yeah, it's just so immersive, and it's and I myself wasn't born in Texas. I was born in Louisiana and moved to Texas when I was real young. But it's Texas is one of those places where you can just kind of show up and just totally can fit in as soon as you want to.
Something that stood out about your film that I kind of saw similarities between that show and movie and The Last Whistle was that there were kind of tones of post-rock ambience music during the movie.
Oh yeah.
And then also a lot of the cinematography, how you kind of filmed at certain angles and certain lighting of the field, also were reminiscent of the movie and the show. Is that something your team was aiming to do, or just happened that way?
Totally. I wanted to do Friday Night Lights, and my team wanted to do Friday Night Lights, but kind of like a Western. I think that there are elements of both, and I think that Friday Night Lights did things that are so it's funny, you go back and watch it now, compare it to something that's coming out now. It's sort of, it's like, oh, I've seen those things done 100 times at this point. You know, the shaky cam, the quick zooms, a lot of the television style documentary realism is kind of what that's called. And it's been done so much that now it's kind of like, oh, this is based on something from 10 years ago. So we had to figure out how to, like, with the same story, try to film it in a way that seemed a lot, more modern. And so, like you said, there are definitely things that we draw from the show. And then there are things that we really tried to bring in ourselves. And that was, whether it was our composer, Logan Austin, kind of bringing together sort of an inspirational soundtrack with that post-rock ambient feel, whether it was cinematographer Brian Tang, and how he would film it in a way that it was on what we call sticks. It was on a tripod. We weren't shaking the camera around. We were trying to keep everything very steady and just slow moving, cinematic. And so we were really trying to bring a very new approach to something that had been just so heavily established and everyone knows.
So when I watched the film, the one thing that kind of struck me as interesting was it had hints of Friday Night Lights to it, but the plot was something I at least personally haven't seen before, and that was, instead of following the complete journey of a high school football team in Texas across one coach, it focused more on a death related to one of the football players, which led to more of a focus on the head coach and how it impacted him and the family. Is that something that came about early on in the script, or how did you kind of find the inspiration to write out the movie that way?
Sure. So, yeah, you're right. It is very much a football movie for the first, half of it, and then it kind of turns into like this, very dramatic character piece, and then you kind of, the football is kind of interspersed at that point. And yeah, it is something kind of very new. Some people have really liked it. Some people have felt a little, fooled by it. Some people were like, I wanted to see a football movie. And other people were like, okay, well, I came for a football movie and I left with this, really intense, piece about all sorts of things in addition to football. And so, yeah, it is definitely, we really kind of brought in a bunch of movies into one with Last Whistle. And yeah, it came at a bunch of different points. I think in the beginning, I almost wanted to just tell a movie about a coach. That was almost the first draft of the script was, let's just make this movie about one man who goes through these things in his life with these number of people. And that was kind of because we thought our budget was going to be even, a tenth or half of what it ended up being. We thought we were going to have a very, very low budget. So whenever we realized, okay, maybe we can raise, like you said, we're talking about $100,000 budget. It's not a lot for a movie, but it's definitely more than I initially thought that I was going to have to make the film. And so that's when we said, okay, you know what, we can sort of open up this world a little bit and really make this feel like a football movie, but a very hyper-focused football movie about one man who's at the turning point of the later part of his life and the people that involves.
Right, and the $100,000 budget is still surprising. I was looking over the film and I'm just thinking to myself, how do you make a film with only a budget of $100,000 when you have to pay actors, you have to pay the film crew, you have to pay special effects editors if that's required, you have to pay all these different groups and I'm thinking to myself,
oh yeah,
how do you afford to disperse the money out to all of these different parties that are developing the film?
Well, so a lot of people were friends, and so that helped in a little bit because everybody still got paid. Everybody got paid, their minimum rate for sure. But people were, they were my friends, and so they were willing to give a maximum effort, even though they were getting a minimum rate. Both them and myself, we spent a lot of time on a lot of projects where we got paid nothing, and we were totally abused the whole time. So it's like I came up through the ranks with everyone that was on this movie with me, from film school and from other sources and other places. And so just that sort of camaraderie really gave us a very, young crew. No one was having to feed kids for the most part. No one was having to, pay a mortgage or, the risk there being that, okay, well, what if we turn out to be super unprofessional, yada, yada, yada. And so, but it worked out super well. And so the crew, having a good crew was really the foundational basis of that. And then after that, it was, okay, let's bring on casts that are excited about the movie. Let's stop worrying about, oh, we have to have, they have to have this many followers or this kind of agent. Let's bring on a cast that are excited about the movie. I don't care what they've been in as long as they can act. And so in that way, we really kind of were able to build this package of the film and not break the bank in the process.
It's interesting because Brad Leland is who stars as the head coach in the film, which is completely opposite from Kyle Chandler, who starred in the original Friday Night Lights show. How'd that come about?
So that was bringing on Brad was actually a nice surprise, and it was really in the weeks leading up to the shoot itself. And so we were working with Brad, the week before the shoot, and making sure he, had all the lines, making sure that he was getting to adjust his lines in the script how he saw fit, and he did a good job. I'm not the kind of, I also wrote the script, and so I'm not sitting here being like, don't touch my words. My words are the Bible. Don't change a comma. You know how it goes. And so that was not what I wanted to do. I gave the script to Brad. I said, whatever doesn't feel right to you, give it to me. Tell me you want to change it. And I'm pretty sure that 9 times out of 10 you're going to be right, because you're about to know this character even better than I do. And the 1 time out of 10 I'll tell you why it should be that way. I have reasons. There's script reasons for it. But just take it, tear it apart, do what you need to do. Just make sure that you don't change any locations or anything. So having Brad was awesome, because he's just a great actor. He has so much stage experience that he would improvise. He would be playing with the other scene members, and it all totally comes across. And that was one of the coolest things ever. Just getting to work with somebody like Brad, who has so much experience, and also is willing to play a coach that is not Kyle Chandler, that is not Billy Bob Thornton, that is not any of the coaches we've seen except for probably John Voight in Varsity Blues, and so I think that sort of, we really tried to go against the grain with, here's a coach that you might not like, here's a coach that is not really a nurturing guy, because our whole goal was, let's do something that is against the grain, let's do something that stands out, instead of going with the flow.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm sitting there watching the movie and I'm debating to myself, is he right or is he wrong about the whole situation? Because again, it's a complex situation to look at. Not many shows or even films really deep dive into high school deaths as related to sports injuries or any other heart-related issues. So it's kind of something that makes you think a lot more than you would normally think about while watching the movie. And I think Brad Leland did a fantastic job playing the head coach, because again, he had that experience in Friday Night Lights, and he had another cast member who was pretty well known in Jim O'Heir, who played Jerry in Parks and Rec. So you kind of have this two opposites of people that are able to work so well together from past experiences in shows. Oh, yeah. That they're able to bring that into your movie. And it's quite cool to see that they're able to portray a football coach and a fan or follower that lives in Texas in such a good way.
And oh my God, having Jim, who, you mentioned, is best known as Jerry Gergich. Man, he is the coolest guy. He's the nicest guy. There are so many parts of him as a person that are like his character Jerry, and there are so many parts of him as a person that are totally night and day different. And so when he showed up, I was so excited to talk to him, and he's done so many movies lately that, with like Steven Soderbergh directed him in Logan Lucky. And like that movie was one of my favorite movies a couple years ago. And so I was asking him as many questions about, what his co-stars on Parks and Rec as I was about his movies. I really tried to keep the fan questions to a minimum. I saved those until the end, being like, okay, wait. So, is it Jerry Terry or, I didn't lead off with that. I led off with, okay, what's it like working with the director of Ocean's 11? And oh my gosh, did you see Ingrid Goes West? And what do you think of Jurassic World? And so I was really trying to. I mean, you just want to be professional. You really want to. You're not the director. Even if I'm sitting here at age 22, 23, and they're here with decades of experience. You need to establish equality in some ways, and you need to show respect in others. And so that's a hard line to walk, because you want to show all of the respect that you have. But that's if you're working with someone that's really cares about the craft, they will really give you the opportunity to act as equals. Because that was something I super enjoyed with Jim, with Brad, and with everyone else on the film.
Yeah, I can imagine that being the case. The young age you were when producing this film, you're working with such professionals. You've gotten your first start with a $100,000 budget to make a film, and it's a cool experience to work with people who are kind of renowned in the industry for the work they do. So you have to hold yourself accountable to some degree. I mean, these people have worked on some interesting shows. So going back to the budget, it seems fairly uncommon for people at a young age to get a budget of $100,000, $250,000, or even more. How did you and your team go about getting the budget to do so, to develop the film?
Yeah, and this was kind of how I think the AMA really took off. Was I tried to target this as more of a business discussion than, hey, come watch my movie, blah blah blah. It's like, hey, ask me questions how I kind of raise this money. Ask me questions how I put together this business plan. And I think that so I went to the USC Film School, and everyone, it's like the Harvard of film schools is what they tell you on day one. I think that there's a lot of panache and things like that. But one of the things that I've seen, even at what they call the Harvard of film schools, is that they don't really talk about the dollars and the cents as much as I think they should. And luckily, I tried to find a lot of professors there that would teach that. And even if they weren't in the film school, they might be in the business school. They might be in, the journalism school. I tried to find those people and just, glean whatever I could from them. And I think that really the key, and what you forget, is that especially when you're starting out, when you're watching movies, all these things, you're learning the crafts as well as you can. You're watching David Lean and Alfred Hitchcock and Steven Spielberg, and it's like, these movies are permeating, and they're giving you the resources to, like Tarantino says, he didn't go to film school, he watched movies. And so what I really tried to do in film school was, okay, now that I've seen all the movies, that I know why they're good and this and that, I want to learn how to make them, not just from a production standpoint, which is, being on set with the camera and the actors. I want to learn to make them from a business standpoint. I want to learn how to raise that money, because in the current industry, there are so many movies and so many shows that these big time agencies, these big time studios, they don't need film school grads to make their product. They've got massive lists of people that they can hire before me. And so I need to figure out how to do that, because no one's going to do it for me. And so a big piece to that was have a strong business plan. Really tried to figure out what the numbers were in terms of profit margin, loss margin, things that you really hear about a lot in business school and never in film school. And so really marrying film school with business school was the way that I was able to literally, dig that $100K and literally bring it together from many, many different sources.
And it sounds very similar to Kevin Smith, who is a comedian, actor, director. He got his start with the film Clerks back in the 90s, and I'm pretty sure he took out multiple credit cards, maxed them out, and was able to get, I think, $27,000 to produce his first film, Clerks. And it's crazy because that film ended up grossing around $3 million after all was said and done. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think how people are able to make movies on shoestring budgets like that and somehow turn it around to be a high-grossing film. And even your film's at the point where it's matching its cost or the budget it was set at and could make a profit on it now.
Exactly. And that's, where I don't see $3 million right off the bat. I don't know if we'll hit $3 million after 5 or 10 years. That'd be amazing. I mean, my goal, again, when I came into the investors was, I can't guarantee this is going to be Clerks. We're going to do our best, but times have changed. And so we're just going to do our best to make your money back plus some. That is my goal. Even though you say, well, any movie can get $100,000, and it's like, okay, yeah, but a movie made on $100,000 it's a little harder, especially when there are so many movies like Clerks getting made now, because everyone kind of looks back on that, as sort of the touch point for the launch of all the and Robert Rodriguez and El Mariachi as well. And I think that there's a overwhelming sense in the indie film world where it's like, if you have the belief, if you have the drive to go out and make your movie, max out the credit cards, do what you got to do, because that, how badly you want it will bring it to fruition. And I think that's not a good idea anymore, because I think that the magic of Clerks was that there were only, a couple hundred movies that got released every year when Clerks came out. And so to have a movie, it's like, if you can bring together, if on 27,000, if you can get the film, you can get the distribution, you can do X, Y, and Z, then yeah, it's gonna make at least, whatever the minimum that movies made in those days was. But in nowadays with digital and with this glut of films that exist, I mean, it's probably 10,000 films a year get made, and probably 1,000 to 2,000 films a year get distribution, in the United States at least. It's just like it's a giant. It has increased by a power, if not 2 powers of 10. And so the age of going and maxing out a credit card because, well, that at least you'll get some of it back. It's dangerous, and I don't recommend it. And it's to the point too where a lot of the other indie filmmakers that have done well are kind of, rebroadcasting that and saying, hey, go make your movie, do whatever it takes, just make your movie. And I think my whole ethos is, don't just go make your movie. Go fail as much as you can with a camera in your backyard. Go learn as much as you can online. And then whenever you feel success is around the corner, then go make your movie. Then put together that business plan and give it all you got. But don't just go out there and throw caution to the wind.
Yeah, I mean, in this environment, I think it's a lot more difficult. Looking back, I think one of the last few films that I saw being successful without much of a budget was I think it was called the Blair Witch Project, and they filmed that movie using just some old camera recorder. And I think it was filmed in black and white, but they also managed to be pretty successful with that film. And mind you, there's probably a couple of other films in the past decade or two that have followed in that success. But I think as the whole market becomes more saturated, when you have Netflix, you have Hulu, you have YouTube, you have Vimeo, all these different mediums to put your films on, and people have accessibility to very strong cameras through their phones,
of course,
any of those devices. I mean, you could probably film a movie on that, but despite that, there are all these different mediums that people are going to get their films created, so it makes it a lot more difficult for the average person to kind of follow in that path when there's not enough money to go around. You have to have a better business idea. You have to have something that's more appealing to the audience. So as easy as it is to create the film, it's a lot more difficult to get the funding to make it, I think.
But I think that the cool thing is kind of what I've been seeing is that, and it's this idea that there are a lot of independent filmmakers trying to win Sundance right now. There are also a lot of both domestic and international producers that are making films that have posters that will sell. And so there are a lot of business people and there are a lot of filmmakers. The only place where the business people go and get the filmmakers to collaborate with them is in Hollywood. You have these, giant movies made by these renowned filmmakers that are both budget savvy and critically acclaimed. But when you're talking about anything under, a couple $1 million, I think that there's a huge disparity, and I think there are way too many people that think that they will, get into a film festival and everything after that will just kind of fall in suit. When in reality, they really should be trying to win a film festival, but with a poster that could show up at, a Redbox rental or something like that.
And that kind of surprised me. I was reading up about the film, and
Sure.
From what I saw, you didn't submit your film to a film festival, yet it became a finalist for the Blacklist Collier Grant and Bet's Project CRE8, and a semifinalist for the Robert Rodriguez Rebels Without a Crew series. It's weird to see that, a film not being submitted to any film festival and not getting the publicity that other films might get was wildly successful. Is there a reason that you didn't submit it to one?
That's partially true. The one or two of those contests were actually for different scripts that I had written, not for this one. Those were for earlier scripts that haven't been made into movies yet. But with the Robert Rodriguez one, at least, I don't think they ever officially announced who was finalist, who was semifinalist, but I know that it got up the ranks at least. And that was the impetus for making the project in the first place. And then the other correction is that we, instead of submitting to all the big film festivals for our premiere, we just struck it. We worked with the Lone Star Film Festival in Fort Worth to premiere the film, and then got into a couple other festivals after that. So everything you said is mostly correct, but the overall thing that you're saying is kind of what I was going for, where it was like, we don't need the awards to get the movie to our audience. And even if we got all of the awards in the book, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll make our business plan any better, because the big players aren't really buying that many films at these major film festivals. And when they do, they don't spend a lot of money on them. So
how did your team go about marketing the film itself without kind of distributing it to a film festival?
So that was kind of our thing was, we're making we're trying to aim for a Friday Night Lights audience. And I've been in that audience for a long time. And if I see a poster that has a film festival laurel on it, especially before I started film school and got to appreciate movies like that, I was like, this is going to be a snooze fest, And I think that that's such a forbidden thing to say at either film festivals or film schools, because that's their lifeblood. And I just think that there's so much of America, at least, that they see a film festival laurel and it's like, oh, this is going to be boring, And it's not the case. I mean, I think the laurels have gotten, there's so many vibrant films now that come through festivals that I think that feeling has gone down. But for someone that we're trying to market to in Alabama or Tennessee or Ohio, they might not have gotten word that, hey, film festival laurels aren't, don't mean boring anymore. There's still there are good movies that happen at festivals now, and there always have been. But that was from the beginning. We were like, even if we got into South by Southwest, I don't think we would put that laurel on our poster, because that's not our audience. I think that would hurt us more than it would help us. So let's work on our marketing. Let's work on our trailer, on our poster, on our publicity, on the news. And so what we did was we really tried to make it a multifaceted thing. It was, like I said, we made sure that we had that Friday Night Lights audience, but that the subject matter of the movie targeted sports health advocates, that we had actors in the movie that would interest people in sports, like Les Miles was huge. I mean, because boom, we've got 2 different college football fandoms that now will be interested in our movie because Les is involved. And there were about 2 or 3 other intangibles that equaled audience interest and publicity possibility, essentially.
That's a different take than you would normally see when people produce films. I think with your film that you focused very hard on developing a refined product, and catered it to a specific group, which again was the Friday Night's Light film and television fans. And I think your team did a great job of following up on that. I mean, if you push the project out to other places, you might have not gotten the same reciprocation as you would have if you kind of just left it in Texas at the time and developed out the business and the film itself more so. So, I mean, it's cool to see that you focused on the hardcore fans and you developed something that was made for them, and everything kind of fell into place from that.
That's definitely what we tried to do, and yeah, I'm glad that came across to you. I'm glad that it, because it, you know, it can be on paper and it might not end up being in the finished product, and that happens all the time. But I will say that these ideas were on paper from day one. These weren't a lot of these things weren't things that we kind of along the way said, oh, let's make it about heart health. Let's bring in, you know, it was like, let's cast someone that's in the world. Let's, you know, do something that involves a social justice, you know, not necessarily political social justice, but in the sense that, you know, sports health can be a form of, you know, social justice. And essentially, let's give ourselves as many possibilities as possible. That's something that we do that we only spend a couple $1,000s on could blow up and become viral and become a better form of free marketing than we could ever have just putting, you know, $15,000 into Facebook ads.
And it seemed to have worked with the reviews it got and the amount of views you've already had from that film. Now, I kind of want to go back to your history and take a look at how you came to the point you are at right now. And to go into that conversation, I want to start off with your influence and inspiration for going to USC. I remember you mentioned that you wrote a letter to George Lucas when you were 10 years old. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I got to, you know, 10, 11, 12 years old, I just kind of said, you know what, I want to write letters to famous people. And so I think I wrote letters to the governor of Texas, the president of the United States, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and you know, 1, 2, 3 other random people. And the politicians, of course, sent back their, you know, their photocopied, like, thank you for being a wonderful citizen of our country, our state, you know, so on and so forth. And so I was like, oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. You know, I went back to 2nd, 3rd grade the next day, or however old it was. And I was like, you'll never guess what I just got in the mail. And the other kids didn't really care, but my teacher was kind of like, wow, you're kind of weird. You know, my teacher's like, I'd never written a letter to anybody. And then, you know, at the end of it, I finally got a letter back from George Lucas, and it was from either he or his secretary, and it was kind of, you know, the similar thing where it was like, thank you for being a great filmmaker, film watcher, and citizen of this country. You know, but there was some, you know, personal flair to it. There was some advice. There was some very, you know, I could tell that whether it was George or his assistant at the time or whoever it was that put it together, they really did, you know, read my letter and at least take the time to write out one of the, you know, 3 to 4 paragraphs that I received. And what it said was, you know, thanks for being a fan of George's films, and thanks for being a fan of Star Wars. You know, we get a lot of requests like this, and George can't send autographs to everybody, but, you know, here's a picture from behind the scenes of Attack of the Clones. And I've still got that on my wall. It's not signed.
It's like a memento.
It is a memento for sure. And then the letter went on to say, you know, if you want to be a movie maker, if you want to be a filmmaker, George recommends film school. George went to, or it was George, or I don't know which it was, but it's like, I went to USC Film School, and it's great. And if that's what you want to do, that's the place to start. Mm-hmm. And so from that day, it just kind of put in my head, okay, George Lucas, USC Film School, neat, you know, from a late elementary school position. And and then 10, 15 years later, I'm sitting there. They have the George Lucas building that's at USC now. They built that 5 or 10 years ago, and premiered The Last Whistle inside that theater.
Wow.
A decade apart.
Looking back, what would you say your first film was, or your first recording of any sort that kind of launched everything forward?
So I can't really say what my first film was, because it's something I had always done. It was something that I don't know how my parents realized it, but they had this like a security camera that hooked up to our old like big box TV, like AV cables basically, and they would let me run around with the camera, and it would broadcast to the screen. And as I must have been 4 years old. I just thought that was the coolest thing I had ever seen, in the late 90s. So so they, a couple years later, my grandpa comes to town. He brings his old video cassette tape camera with him and says, "Here you go, kid. Take a spin at this thing." And I just sunk my teeth into it. I taped so much that I was taping back over things, and you get like the magnetic, like they weren't pixels, but what we would think to be pixels nowadays. Like it ended up being 4 or 5 videos at once, because I had taped over it so many times with that same tape, that the magnetic data totally got scrambled. Because it just was not built for that, but it's all I had, and it was all I did. And so every 3 or 4 years after that, for my childhood, I would just I'd get the newest, whatever, the cheapest camera that I could get for my birthday or for Christmas, or if I had to combine the two to do it. I've got like I've got a October birthday, so it's like if I was really gearing up for something that was low 3 digits. I could negotiate my way into, let me combine my birthday and Christmas for this camera or whatever. And if I mowed the lawn as much as I could, maybe I'd gain it. Mm-hmm. But really just finding the cheapest thing on the market that would let me do a little more than I was doing before, that would let me learn a little more, a battery that would let me film for longer, a memory card that would let me film a little later. And so I think that it all kind of came to a head when I was in middle school. Maybe it was 5th or 6th grade even. And I finally had an editing system. And I think that once I had an editing system, it must have been Windows Movie Maker. I think that I edited even videos that I didn't know how to export, that are lost forever, because I was editing without knowing how to export at that point too. So long story long, I think that my first real, short film was as soon as I was able to take all this footage I had shot and actually arrange it into a story, into 3 acts.
Wow.
That was cool.
That takes me back to the 90s myself. I remember being in the 90s, and my friends and I would have these cassette-based cameras, and we would spend a lot of time writing films and just producing them around the house, out in the backyard, out in the desert, stuff like that. And we came up with a lot of creative films. And it's interesting to see when you don't have access to the abundance of technology like computers and such back then, but you have access to cassette cameras. There's a lot of inspiration and creativity that can be involved in just going out and creating these movies.
And I don't know if this was true for you, but what surprised me so much was looking back on the ones that I did save. I have all the genres. Before I even knew what genre was, I had a short film that matched every single genre in the book. I don't know if that was the same for you.
I would say that when I was younger, a lot of our films were action-based, and it seemed like on the edge of like sci-fi and some comedy with horror elements involved, and it was just all over the place when we filmed. But at the end of the day, I would say that a lot of that stuff provided a great deal of creative output. You could just engage all day, all weekend, in just creating these films and rewatching them. And it's not some blockbuster production, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, it was a lot of great fun going into creating these films. And I would say that it could be a great deal of inspiration for anybody at a young age that wants to go into filmmaking like yourself.
Oh yeah, and it was so cool. I mean, I had my old 6th grade teacher who assigned me my first ever video project. Come to a Last Whistle screening that was in Dallas, and it was just neat to sit there, 15 years later, and have her, sitting there, because I remember her video assignment better than most of my short films that I've made, just because it was such an influential start to just the excitement. And the thing I enjoyed the most about it was I was having as much fun watching my own movie as I was watching the other groups and the other groups' movies that they had all made. And then in the end, there was one group that actually, made a better movie than my group did, even though we'd worked so hard on it and we had gone above and beyond to get, we didn't care about the grade at a certain point because we wanted to make a cool movie. And in the end, they made a better movie. And I was like, oh, not only is this like a cool artistic thing, but there's some competition to this. And now I feel like, well, crap, I'm not going to let them just beat me. Like, there won't be any other video projects here. But like, I mean, I will never forget watching that movie and thinking, man, they beat me. They did better than I did. And I'm not sour about it, but it's definitely going to get me out of bed tomorrow morning, and I'm going to come back even stronger.
Yeah, it's an inspirational twinge, so to speak. I know you mentioned also that your former teacher attended, and it seems like a lot of inspiration and a lot of influence comes from mentors at a young age. You'll see football players go on to the NFL, for example, and they'll have their past coaches present when they go to the draft. I mean, for you to have your teacher there, that must have been a pretty cool
It was cool. And she's an English teacher. And so it's like all of my inspirations were English teacher, history teacher. My theater teacher who did some film classes with us at the end of my high school time. But at no point did I have someone who was like, hey, here's a camera, here's how to work a camera. So I totally came into this whole world without having anyone that was actually in the world mentoring me, in a sense. And so it just totally, it was just, it was like a shark, sharks only breathe when they're swimming. It's like, I have to keep making movies. Like, I don't care if no one's showing me how to do it. Like, I'm just going to keep, bashing my head into a wall until I break through, and I'm going to go find a stronger wall and keep going.
And a lot of that comes from creativity. You'll have competition at hand, and people are going to be making films that might be better than yours. But when you create something and there's creativity involved and you have all these ideas running inside of your head, I mean, it just keeps inspiring you to create more and more, despite there being competition, despite there being failure at some point or another. Yeah, so I mean, it's awesome to see that at a young age you're able to find that competition and internal inspiration and just keep going with creating your films and ultimately, creating The Last Whistle. Now, I want to circle back to the movie itself. Something that really caught my eye with it was that you said your film was shot in only 13 days. And this is kind of confusing to me because when I watch a feature-length film in the theater, they take years to produce. I mean, you'll have months of filming, and then after that, they're going to do special effects and then post-editing, anything else that's involved. I mean, I'm not an expert in film, but just things I can gather off the top of my head. How do you go about creating a film in 13 days without any of that?
Well, it's the idea that's all the money we had, first of all. I mean, it was like, if you go to day 14, then you have a bunch, it's like, if you do 13 days, then you can basically do 2 6-week days and a day in between. So as soon as you go to day 14, you almost have to go to day 15 or day 16 before it starts to make financial sense again. And so you see a lot of feature films shot in 18 days or in 19 days because that's sort of the next like plateau where the budget kind of stabilizes again. So you're talking about 13, basically, and the hardest part was that it was 13 days and we were shooting 8 to 10 hour days, especially with non-union crews. If you want to work them 16 hours a day, there are no union boss is going to come after your production and shut you down. And so there are tons of feature films out there that are made on independent budgets that shoot in 18 to 20 to 24 days, and they're working people 14 hours, 15 hours a day without overtime pay, with just on whatever rate they agreed to. And so the challenge for me wasn't so much doing it in 13 days. It was doing it in 13 days and only getting, 8 hours a day for filming time. And then an hour to set up, an hour to take down, or an hour, 30-30 and an hour for lunch or whatever it may be.
That must be absolutely draining, though. I mean, if you're pushing out a film in 13 days, working that many hours and are limited in the budget, it's must be exhausting on that, looking at that.
It is in a way. I've done movies that were all outside. I've done, so it's like the key was drink a ton of LaCroix, number one, stay hydrated. My middle school principal gave me a nice bottle of like whiskey and said, I was obviously 21 at the time, so I wasn't that young, but pretty close to 21. And he was like, a little bit of this every night once you get home. And I was like, oh, that actually was huge because it really allowed me to get home. I just, you just a little bit of alcohol in the tongue, and then it's like, okay, this day is done. It's like it's just close the door.
Right.
And even if you only got an hour before you got to go to sleep and wake up again, you have that hour. But yeah, it's what you're saying. It's super fast. There were things that I appreciated about it, but yeah, super fast.
So what were some of the favorite parts of the production process?
Well, I mean, my favorite part is it's all of the firsts. So it's like it's as soon as you call action on that first scene, because if you do that, that means that you have done just about all the casting, just about all the producing. Hopefully, at that point, you have a movie. It's like you get to finally make your movie after all these months of preparing and emails and calls and negotiations. It's like finally I get to make a movie. And so I cherish that moment. I also love the first time that I get to watch an assembly. So, we talk about assemblies as sort of you take all of your footage and you just kind of put it in a row. You don't really edit it yet. And it usually runs about a half hour to an hour longer than your finished movie will be because you'll edit out so much. So I love watching the assembly, and then I love the first time showing it to an audience because it's all about the audience. And it brings me back to why I ran around with that camera all those years ago, which was I would make the movie during the day and I'd show it to my family during dinner. We'd watch it, it'd be 5 minutes long, they'd laugh, it'd be done. I'd start over, I'd do it all again the next day. So those 3 moments are my absolute favorites.
That's awesome. Something that I found to be interesting was that you mentioned you and your crew rebelled against what is normally done in the film industry. How would you describe this?
I would say what we sort of bucked was this idea that the quality of the image was more important than the story. I think that there are a lot of movies made nowadays where if you don't shoot on a certain camera, if you don't shoot with a certain equipment, no one thinks that you're, legit, essentially.
Why do you think that's the case?
It's a good question. I think it's just like any industry where it's if you're a stockbroker and you don't wear a 3-piece suit, or you're a it's like it's the uniform essentially. It's and so if you show up and you see a bunch of young 20-somethings running around with a camera and no green screen, no big lights, all of these other things that you normally see, you just kind of say, well, why isn't that stockbroker wearing a suit? And it has nothing to do with is this person good at what they do or not. It just has to do with what do they look like. So I would say what we did was we kind of bucked the appearance in favor of honing in on or honing the quality.
So it's more of a rebellion against how films should be shot. I mean, when I look at films myself, you'll see a lot of directors, and I don't remember names of them, but you'll see they filmed in IMAX and they filmed in 8mm film, and they carry themselves a certain way or dress a certain way. Is there anything else outside of that you feel that your team kind of rebelled against that was typically a norm in the film industry of how you should go about producing a film from start to finish?
Those 10 to 12 hour days. And it basically entailed only getting 3 to 5 takes on a given angle. It made it so we had to cut our angles down to, the wide angle, which is where you see both characters, and then the close up where you see their face. We really only got a few what they would call angles on each of the scenes. And And the camera we used was not the nicest camera in the world. It was an excellent camera. I love what it got us, but we had access to nicer cameras at the same rate, and we chose to go for one that was not the nicest because we wanted something that would film longer, that would have more memory, that wouldn't crash my computer when I started editing, a month later. And because we didn't think the audience would know the difference between the cameras, and they don't. So I guess those two things.
I think it's becoming more difficult for that to happen. I mean, cameras are becoming so powerful nowadays that it's hard to tell the difference between them.
Exactly. And I think that what we did was we used the right tools for the job. Whereas most filmmakers would want to use the most expensive tools that they can get for the budget.
Right.
And so I'd say that was kind of what we did differently.
You mentioned that you only got a certain amount of angles or cuts. What does that mean exactly?
So whenever any film gets made, first of all, they don't shoot the whole movie from start to finish. They shoot it out of order,
right.
which we all know in the back of our heads, but it's so easy to forget because movies just go in such a logical order that you can't. I even forget that so often. I forget it so often, and that's why actors are really so good, is because they can do the saddest scene and the happiest scene 5 minutes apart. And and you're sitting here and you watch their character move across this entire filmic journey, and they can do it in 20 seconds, and it's just like that is what makes it so challenging to be an excellent actor, is to be able to just turn on a dime and to be able to know your character's arc so well that you know who you are at every different part of the movie. But whenever you film a scene, just one scene, what they typically do is they start with the wide, which is where you just open up the lens and you film everything in the room and you film the whole scene, and then you call cut, and then you say, okay, action, take 2, action, take 3, action, take 4. And you basically work the wide until it really feels like it's perfect. So the wide can go through any number of takes. So it could be 8, it could be 10, it could be 20. Directors like Kubrick would take 60, 70 takes because they wanted it to be... Yeah, it's nuts. If it was anybody else besides Kubrick, they would have gotten shut down. But it's Kubrick, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, all of his most famous movies. So it's... but the actors actually would start to bigger with him. But you basically get anywhere from 8 to 15 takes per angle. So you start with the wide, and then you start to do what are called mediums, which is where you kind of get everywhere from the waist to the top of the head of the actor. And then you do mediums for everyone that talks in the scene. And then you do close-ups, which is more of the upper body head, space of each of the characters that are more intense in the scene, or everyone that you think would get that. So at the end of a scene, and then you do inserts, which is, okay, they pick up a glass of water, you're moving the camera around following them. It's kind of very basic, what we would call coverage. You're providing coverage for the filming of a scene. And so after you talk about all those angles, if you say that's, let's say there's only 2 people in the scene, that's still 7 angles at least. God forbid you have a third person in the scene, or a fourth or a fifth. And so that's where you can get, if you're doing 10 takes of every angle, then you're calling action and cut 70 times for a single scene, more or less. And so what we did that really flipped that on its head is I would do a lot of rehearsal while they were setting up the camera. We would start filming during the rehearsals that we knew we wouldn't use, because it gets the rest of the crew kind of tuned in to the shoot. And so we would kind of get, 3 or 4 bad takes out of our system during the rehearsal. And then I would call action on the first wide. And then we would maybe do 5 takes of the wide angle. We might not do 8. We might not do 15. There were some where we definitely went to 10 because I had to get something very specific right. But for most of the wide angles, we would do from 3 to 5 takes of really real stuff. And then we would continue doing 3 to 5 takes into the close-ups, into the inserts. And sometimes we would cut a medium shot. We would say, you know what, I know that I'm talking to the editor. He knows what he wants, and it's not artistic, but it is very cost-effective to sort of film what you know you're going to edit. And would I do that on a big movie? Absolutely not. But would I do it on a small budget? Of course. because what that does is it improves the quality of everything else you're doing and only loses you a little bit of quality in the moment. So it's all cost benefit analysis, but that's kind of the long story long on what I'm trying to describe there.
So what is it that a director usually keys on when they're doing all these cuts, when the first take isn't good enough, the second take isn't good enough, the third take isn't good enough? What is it that they're trying to really change about that specific take to get what they're looking for?
Well, what's nice is when you're starting out as a director, you're working with a lot of student actors, and so what'll happen a lot of the times is you're trying to bring that actor to a place where they embody the character. But when I get to work with amazing people like Jim O'Hare, Brad Leland, Les Miles, Eric Nelson, I mean, Fred Tolliver, Tyler Perez, I mean, everybody that's on this movie was just so awesome. They know their character. They're not student actors anymore. They were years ago, but they know what they're doing. And so that's where it's really on me to not be a student director anymore. That's because the student director is there to fix what's obviously going wrong with their student actor. But when you get to be a professional director, or whatever you would call a starter outer, essentially, you're looking for things that, you as the director are there as the bird's eye view. You are almost the helicopter in like a police chase. And so if you're watching, all of the little squad cars try to surround the bank robber, and you can see one of the squad cars is continuing to go straight, but you can watch the bank robber take a different turn, then you say, okay, he's going south. I can see where you're going while you're in the car driving. And so that's kind of the relationship between an actor and a director is if an actor starts to go off on a tangent, I know where the rest of the movie's going, and they know that I know that. And so they are going to do what they feel is right in the moment, and it's usually the best thing to do. And there's one time in 5, one time in 10 where I come in and I say, actually, there's a scene later where something happens. So so your objective in this scene is actually X more so than Y, and they'll go, oh, okay, good. It's talking about objective. It's talking about their blocking. It's talking about what they want from the other person. It's not so much anymore. You said that wrong, or you that's not really how I think they should ask that question. It's all tied to things that are before and after in the overall film.
So it's guiding the film basically from a 30,000-foot view perspective and knowing where the film is going to go. So you're kind of guiding the actors in that direction, each scene one by one. And
then what it is too is if an actor does something hilarious on the last take of the scene, you're like, wait a second, can we do that one more time? Like that was I didn't write that. You totally brought that out of nowhere. And I want to make sure that we didn't lose focus on that shot. I want to make sure that everything that's called, doing one for safety or doing one for, to make sure that everything was in place. Because if you're likely to get something wrong once, but if you do one for safety, at least you've got the same thing again in case you need to, pull a different part out in editing. It's that, and then it's also just, what does the editor need to work with? What does, what are there things that the editor might be looking for that would be helpful to them?
Now, based off your experience, though, what would you say are some misnomers about working in the film industry?
Sure. I think the first one is that it's sort of there's not so much a sense of breaking in like there used to be. There were kind of those stories of, kind of breaking in and, winning a festival award and kind of, just, launching from there. And I think that a lot of the filmmakers I see now are very much self-starters. We're all trying to break in at the same time, but, you break in and then what? And I think that a lot of the writers, the directors, the actors have become producers at the same time, because it's now kind of becoming this same thing where it's like you have to be your own self-starter in a sense. No one's just going to hand you a movie for the most part. That's obviously not the given rule, but that's something that's kind of I've seen as a misnomer. You've had all of this Me Too activity happen, and it's been fantastic, I think, because and of course I can't speak for every single don't hold me to every single piece of everything is fantastic with everything, but what it's done is it's done a fantastic job of really making people that would take advantage of people, even in just the smallest ways. It's really, if not taking them out of their jobs, it's sent them into hiding, and they don't do it. And they definitely don't do it on set. They don't, so it's like I came into this movie worried that whether it was this movie, whether it was hopefully the next one, hopefully I get another one, not hopefully it happened on the next one, whatever it may be, I was like, crap, I'm going to have to deal with this at some point because, I've heard this is such a rampant issue of people just taking advantage of people, on whatever. But since everything has happened with Me Too, it's like this new generation of filmmakers and everyone that's, kind of 10, 15 years ahead of me, it's like, no, we're not putting up with it anymore. And now it's in the society that we are all in agreement that it's not going to happen. And it just makes it so much more professional. And then I guess the third kind of misnomer would be that that actors are very posh and stuck up in between their scenes. I think I was having more fun with Brad and Jim and all the rest of them than I was with my friends who were the crew members, just because they let loose so often. It really is a lot of fun if you don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah, that whole actor bit where they seem to act posh or are stuck up, that's kind of a rotten apple in a basket of apples. You'll see a lot of people say, well, this actor is terrible in public, or this person's mean when you try to introduce yourself to them. And I can see from both perspectives, one being that they're constantly in the public eye and people are either filming them or trying to interview them, and at some point or another, it might become a nuisance. But at the same time, they have to expect that with fame, there's going to be that certain level of publicity, and people are going to bother them and ask for their autographs. So you might have both of those occurring. And then in regards to being on set, that's kind of an interesting one. I mean, from what I could tell, most people or most actors are pretty good to be around on set. I don't understand why they wouldn't be, because you hired them for that film for a specific reason. And if you can't get along with them, or if they're not down to earth, then something's not right there. It doesn't really make any sense to me.
Well, it's where it makes sense. I mean, it doesn't, it never really makes sense, but where that tends to happen, and where you get the folks who are, it's like, oh, you know what? I saw them in public and they were mean to me. It's like some people are just genuinely mean, and I'm not gonna. And I think that you can kind of tell the actors that might not be, the nice people in public, or even the directors or the cinematographers. I mean, there are the celebrities all over the place. And I've definitely, seen them and run into them and what have you. I think that you get that on movies where they kind of feel coerced to do the movie, or if it's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, this is horror movie 7, the Reckoning. It's like they're there to do a job, and I think that's kind of what I was talking about, where it's like you want to respect and realize that there are some areas where you need to be an equal at the same time, and walk that balance. The autographs, or I'm trying to think of a good scenario, just because I really haven't had that many in my real life. I just hear from other people. I have watched other sets and that sort of thing. It's only when it's like, you have no idea they're at work just like anybody else. And there are actors who are, on the phone with their lawyer going through like a nasty divorce on like a comedy set, and it's just like, it's like, yeah, they're not going to want to sign an autograph because they're already walking this narrow line here, so it's with a lot of the ones that there are conflicting stories for, if you listen to the ones that are the negative run-ins, then it's like, oh, well, I can see how they were having a bad day. I mean, come on. But no, it's true. There are totally actors that are jerks all the time, and it's a judgment call. I think if I had a movie someday and there was an actor that maybe didn't have the best reputation or all these things, it would be, okay, how long are they going to be on set? Do we, it's like, do we worry that they would be mean to somebody, and how much of an asset are they to us? And I think that at the end of the day, you really want to just find people that you're not going to hate working with. And I think that I can't think of too many opportunities where I would want to buck that trend.
So you already got your piece of advice from George Lucas when you were 10 years old. What would you give in terms of advice to anybody that's interested in becoming a producer, a director, or any other position within film? Mm-hmm. And what advice would you give to people who are in a completely different industry but want to transition into film?
I think that the advice is the same for both, and it's a little different for each, but it comes from the same place, and that's if you, whatever industry you're in, especially if you're in film, know your audience, know who you're there to serve, and serve them to the best of your abilities. At the same time, serve them in a way that no one else can serve them. But do it to the best of your abilities. So it's because if you follow one and not the other, you're either going to make, a movie that, and that's kind of what I said even in the Reddit, is it was like, put the audience in the passenger seat, because so many either filmmakers or even salesmen or, realtors. I mean, I'm trying to, every industry here, you're either going to take, the customer, and if you put them in the trunk, then you're going to serve them a hamburger that they hate, that they don't want to taste, that is a hamburger that you said, I'm going to do it my own way, and they're not going to enjoy being put in the trunk. If you put them in the driver's seat, they're going to drive. There's none of your influence there, and so they can go buy their own car. So why are you taking them for a test drive? And what do you hope to convey to them through that? So yeah, sorry, I interrupted you there.
I was going to say, isn't that kind of weird that we see in the film industry that companies continuously push out sequels upon sequels, even though the audience does not want to see anymore of those? And they're just like, well, this is repetitive and seems like a complete money grab, but the movie's shitty. Like, why do I want them to keep producing these films when no one's interested in them? Right. And it seems like a common occurrence where producers are just not paying attention to their audience. They're not paying attention to what the viewer wants to see. I mean,
it's because honestly, it makes sense on paper. It makes sense to take a animated movie 4 and to say we had 1 million people show up for animated movie 1. We had 1.5 million people show up for animated movie 2. Animated 3 movie sucked, so only 500,000 people showed up for that. But we think that if animated movie 4 is half good, at least 250,000 people will show up for that one. So let's spend, $2.5 million, and they'll, it's because it's those sorts of things are born in boardrooms. Mm-hmm. And it's the business side of things, and that's anytime someone asks, how do I raise the money for a movie, it's like you have to be able to have that mindset at the same time that you have your creative mindset, and you have to find an area, a space where they can work together.
Right, and it seems like a tough way to balance the line. I mean, on one part of it, you're focusing so much on delivering a quality film to the audience, mm-hmm. and at the same time you have to weigh the implications of a boardroom saying, well, we want 3 more sequels for this film, even though deep down that filming another sequel for it is a terrible idea. So I can just imagine from a perspective of a producer or director, like what's going on through their head, like when they're walking into a boardroom and they're asking him to film multiple sequels of that film.
Right, and really, and I got some flack on this on the Reddit AMA, people being like, "Wow, you're just a gross opportunist here." And I think that what I was trying to, what I responded with was, no, I'm just trying to make Transformers so that someday I can do a Bumblebee. In the same way that the Transformers franchise started as this massive, overweight, mechanical monstrosity, and has now sort of become like the indie hit of the year. but makes a ton of money in the process, being this 80s character piece. It's like I want that. If I can't just step up on day one and walk through the gates of Hollywood, if I have to take some sort of crazy route to get there, I think I would rather take that route than have to throw chance to the wind and hope that judges at the film festivals sort of find me worthy or whatever. It's like, no, I'd rather have fun smashing robots' faces into each other and then get to do what I want to do than starve for the art and all those sorts of things. But don't worry, there's been plenty of starving. I'm not saying that. That's definitely
it's a starving artist, basically.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I can see where people might be concerned about the idea that you're an opportunist and all of that. But one thing your team has done is focused the film to bring awareness to medical nature of health issues in sports. And one of the things you did was partnering with the American Heart Association to raise awareness. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a hard mission. It was something, again, that I started with. I thought at one point there might even be, that we might even partner with a health group to fund the movie, in a sense where it's like, okay, let's almost make this a feature length, public service announcement about this heart condition. And if you give us some money to do it, then we can do it. It was born from, how do we get this movie financed? The financing came from private sources. We didn't end up needing to partner with any sort of health group to finance the movie. And so at that point, it was like, okay, now we're making this movie about this heart condition. If we get the science wrong, if we seem like we're just trying to take advantage of this tragedy, if we do any part of this to where it doesn't feel genuine, we're going to get dragged through the mud. Because that's cruel. It's terrible. And so we said, okay, let's find all the heart groups. Let's find all the groups that deal with cardio health and all these things. And let's make sure that we are on the page with them, that we can figure out some way to work with them. And so they were super receptive. The hard thing is that a lot of these groups are just massive corporate entities. Even though they are nonprofits or whatever it may be, nonprofits can be, have Fortune 500 nonprofits. We've got 500 plus employees. And so the idea with the heart groups was start early, vote early, vote often. Start early, and keep on them. And find either who it is inside their corporate sphere that handles these things, which was good for the Heart Association, the American Heart Association. They were fantastic to work with, and they had a great infrastructure to work with us. Or if you're working with a smaller nonprofit that doesn't have someone dedicated to like media relations, find the closest person to that, usually in marketing, and train them at the same time that they're kind of figuring out how they can, make use of you. And so we have a disclaimer at the end of the film or not a disclaimer, but a little information piece that says the American Heart Association, in collaboration with The Last Whistle, wishes to share the following information, something along those lines. And then the American Heart Association also partnered with the Anthem Foundation to put on our movie premiere and do a Q&A afterward with a bunch of specialists talking about CPR and defibrillators and the importance of those things. So that's very much now where we're getting into the I keep calling it social justice, even though it's not really that, but it kind of has a similar tinge to it. The social justice sphere, where it's like, okay, now how do we use the message of the film to continue to make the movie's money back for the investors, and at the same time bring awareness to the conditions in the film, more importantly, obviously. So that we can keep these athletic collapses from happening, and when they do happen, we know how to respond to them. And so I'll say now it's call, push, shock. It's call 911. It's perform CPR, and then if there's a defibrillator on site, pop it out, use it. That's the ABCs to when someone collapses. What do you do? It's very simple.
Yeah, and that's kind of tough when it comes to filmmaking. You'll see a lot of films either go full-blown marketing and try to put out this idea of X, Y, and Z related to some health issue, or, for example, going vegetarian, or you shouldn't do this or that with eating certain foods and whatnot. But again, between 1982 and 2015, I was reading the study that said 735 high school students died as a result of their participation in school sports, and 3/4 of those was due to cardiac arrest. But it's cool to see that your film doesn't err on one side of the extreme of being a film with the sole purpose of being a film, and on the other side of trying to build awareness for a specific issue such as cardiac arrest. You guys were able to find that happy medium of trying to bring awareness to that issue without it seeming like a full-blown awareness campaign.
Sure, and I think that's what really I was having trouble with watching the Will Smith movie Concussion. And it was just like, it's like so much of what they're saying is true, but man, like it's just like they're right in everything that they're trying to say. But it's so hard because football is such an American, pastime. It is right up there with baseball, and it's just such an important thing to us. And the game has gotten a lot safer since that movie came out. But you don't know. And so I think I wanted to do something that I knew was affecting players as much as the concussions, but that, wasn't like, oh, look how bad football is, because it affects all sports. It affects all kids. It's genetic. It's, that was the idea, was to, again, not to be, I didn't want to be heavy handed with this. I wanted to say, you know what, here's the information. Here's a story about it. Do what you will with this. We're going to give you the tools, but I'm not going to beat you over the head with this or anything else in this movie.
I did find there to be that happy balance between both. I mean, it was entertaining in of itself as a football movie, but you still got the subtle understanding of the awareness being brought to the surface level with cardiac arrest and, other health-related issues. That said, you also have a book that is available on Amazon called Rebel with a Crew, Not Without. Can you talk a bit about what that is about?
Yeah, so Rebel with a Crew is sort of a response to the classic book Rebel Without a Crew. And it's Rebel Without a Crew is all about Robert Rodriguez, how he made El Mariachi, how he got his start as an indie filmmaker, and it's become a Bible for many filmmakers nowadays, to the point that too many movies that are like Rebel Without a Crew have been made. And it's kind of people running around with a camera and kind of, scrounging together what they can to make a movie. And the issue is that the movies don't always turn out good. They don't always turn out to have high quality. And it's such a slog for the person doing it, and ends up being such a difficult thing with no success. Some of them have success for sure, but others don't, that they don't do it again. And so Rebel with a Crew, which is the book that I put together, is all about how to bring together a team to do that debut project, and to make sure that the quality is good enough and that you have enough help that you're not going to hate yourself at the end of it for soloing the whole thing and for creating a product that has been made way too many times since he did it first. And so a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, especially if anyone's listening from a more entertainment background, it's really, I really tried to put the very nuts and bolts answers in there, especially when it comes to, okay, I'm just about to graduate from film school. I'm just about to, do this and that. I want to become this. I want to become that. It's good for writers, directors, whatever may have you. And so it's a book that I wrote right after I finished filming the movie, and kind of just said, hey, here's how we did it. I feel like what we've done has been a moderate success. And so now I'm going to go back and do the official, first edition of Rebel with a Crew, and really put in all of the numbers that we've seen at this point, and really try to make it a handbook for people that want to go and do that first movie, but might not have the resources that the more famous indie filmmakers right now have. And again, it's kind of coming at it like, well, you had $100,000. That's crazy money. And I agree that I felt so grateful to have that sort of investment to work with. And it's just such a strange space where it's you have a lot and you have a little at the same time. And which is it? And it's totally both. And so this would be a handbook for people that are thinking about working in that space and keeping them from getting taken advantage of by a system that is very good at profiting off of those movies, and holding the profits back.
So, Robert, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. There was a lot of informative information, not only about your experiences, about the films you worked on, as well as your collaborations with the American Heart Association to raise awareness about heart-related ailments in sports. Now, again, you have the book Rebel with a Crew, Not Without, and the film The Last Whistle. For those interested in checking those out, where can they find them?
Sure. So the Last Whistle, the movie, can be found on iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, Microsoft Store, bunch of other spots like Vudu as well. DVD is also available if get one for your grandparents. Grandparents love hearing from you. If you still have them and you're lucky enough to have them, DVDs are available on Target.com, Walmart.com, and then in store at some of the Walmart locations. We're really trying to push everybody to Amazon right now. So if you got a Prime account, hit the Amazon, because we're trying to make sure their algorithm likes us. And then the Rebel with a Crew Zero Edition is available also on Amazon Books. It's just I think it's like $7 or $8. I tried to make it as cheap as they would let me sell it for, just because it's kind of half a book right now, and I'll be putting out that first edition once I get the rest of our numbers, once I get the rest of the information on the whole thing. Amazon is the short answer, and there's definitely a long answer. And I'm all over. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and my common username is MadSmatter. That's MadSmatter. But just Google my name, Rob Smat, and there's only one of me. You'll find me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Robert. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. This is great. Thank you.